Hey, what's happening, gamers? It's Kwing here, and I'm here to do a review of my favorite TV show, Chuck, on NBC 8/7 Central Monday nights. Before I get to the actual review, which is in the video attached to this video, I'm actually going to be exploring what Chuck was to get people familiar with what the series is. And of course, I will be reviewing the Chuck versus the other guy in the other video, and the video will contain spoilers. But just to get this off my chest, and people who are new to Chuck and you're Chuck fans, Sarah and Chuck are officially an item. It took 2 seasons, but it finally happened in Chuck versus the other guy. But in order to hear more from that, just click the link over in the sidebar. But if you guys want to find out what Chuck is, then keep listening to this video. Chuck is a mixture of action, comedy, romance, drama, suspense, and appeals to gamers big time. The show is also one of a kind, and there aren't many other shows exactly like Chuck. It's kind of like the Get Smart of our generation. Not only does this show feature lots of video game related stuff, but the main character is also a nerd working at a Best Buy ripoff called the Buy More. How the show begins is with an action super secret agent called Bryce Larkin. Bryce has stolen an advanced government supercomputer called the Intersect, and Chuck is actually the opposite of Bryce, and one would see him as a loser. Bryce sends Chuck an email before he's shot by John Casey, and disguises it as a text-based video game similar to the ones that he and Chuck played in college for fun. Being the nerd that Chuck is, he easily cracks the code and unlocks the Intersect, which somehow downloads into his brain. Hence, Chuck becomes like Neo from The Matrix, except so much cooler. Fast forward a ways, and Chuck meets his love interest of the series, Sarah Walker, whom is a CIA agent ordered to protect Chuck, because they don't know that he's the Intersect yet. The other character is the NSA Superman, John Casey, whom is my wife's favorite character, by the way. Anyway, Sarah and Casey end up fighting over Chuck, but eventually team up to save him from Fulcrum agents. The rest of the first season is a mixture of both action and romance, where Chuck and Sarah's cover is actually that of a boyfriend and girlfriend. But the hilarious part about it is they're supposed to be a fake couple because it's just her cover. But what happens is Sarah ends up falling for Chuck and vice versa. Casey is also supposed to protect the Intersect, but he doesn't really like Chuck. So he has complicated feelings about what he's supposed to do with Chuck, especially when he's given the order to kill Chuck as soon as the new Intersect has been completed. Season 2 had the most episodes and also the biggest budget, and Chuck also remains as the Intersect, and he and Sarah's relationship becomes less fake. Casey and him also get this whole teacher-student relationship and kind of become friends. During all the intensity of this season and the exciting episodes to round out Season 2, they end the season with a cliffhanger with Chuck downloading the new Intersect 2.0, which turns Chuck into Super Chuck, and then the show ends. What's sad is the show almost ended up getting canceled. It was renewed, and a 3rd season did premiere, but not in the fall of 2009. It didn't premiere until January 10th, 2010. It got awesome ratings at the beginning, but they also alienated a lot of Chera fans, because the 3rd season takes place several months after the end of the 2nd season, and Chuck and Sarah are no longer a couple. Now, Season 3 has been a mixed bag of emotions for me. Personally, I liked it, and Casey had a lot of stuff happen to him in Season 3, so if you're a fan of John Casey, this character really developed a lot this season. The only thing I wasn't thrilled about this season was Casey being fired from the NSA as committing treason. I will hand it to the writers in giving Adam Baldwin a lot of comedy skits between him and Lester and Jeff, as well as heartfelt moments and Casey-centered episodes. Anyway, back to Chuck and Sarah. Sarah is really mad and hurt at Chuck. What happened was Chuck and Sarah had a brief encounter moment at a train station in Prague, where Sarah was willing to run away with him and be with him, but Chuck wanted to be a spy instead. Later he reveals that he did it to protect her because he loves her, and being the Chuck that he is right now, he needed to learn the Intersect 2.0. But this stunt unfortunately lasted for 10 episodes, and Chera fans stopped watching the show, so the ratings plummeted big time. The worst they've ever been. However, the show now seems that it's at a time for renaissance for Chera fans, as the character who put ripples in the water is now dead. But before we look at him in the past tense, let's take a look at Sarah. Over the last 2 seasons, we've seen her become more human as opposed to a cold-blooded character, where Sarah actually shows more emotion and no longer sees it as a weakness, as emotions are just part of being human. She opened up to Chuck a little bit in the 2nd season, and the 3rd season she's even questioning continuing to be a spy. For a majority of season 3, instead of showing the show from Chuck's perspective, the audience gets to see the events unfold through Sarah's viewpoint, which is actually very clever. Sarah thinks that Chuck 2.0 is not the same Chuck she fell in love with. So in season 3, she's tried to get her identity back and become like the first season Chuck. Season 3 has been a great time to be a Sarah fan. Fans learn not only her real name, but also that her red test was the worst day of her life. And Shaw's too. So since Chuck to Sarah is no longer the same Chuck she fell in love with, she's chosen to be with Shaw. By the end of Chuck vs. the American Hero, Chuck tells Sarah that he loves her and wants to run away with her. In Chuck vs. the Beard, Chuck discovers that deep down he still loves Sarah, and the intersect starts working 110%, now that Sarah is no longer Chuck's kryptonite, and his emotions are no longer conflicted. Still, the events from Chuck vs. the Final Exam are making her hesitate being with him, creating a lot of tension between the characters. Basically, that episode is where Chuck was supposed to take his red test and kill somebody. Chuck tried to arrest his target instead, but the target ended up in a Mexican standoff with his gun drawn. So knowing that Chuck will probably die, Casey kills the rogue agent. But Sarah thinks Chuck is the one who pulled the trigger. When Chuck tries to call her and tell her the truth, she tells Shaw that she used to love Chuck, but he's not the same person. So going back to the American Hero, after Chuck tells her that he still loves Sarah, we see Sarah packing her bags, and Casey comes to her apartment to tell Sarah the truth about Chuck's red test. Casey reaffirms Sarah's belief in Chuck that Chuck isn't a killer, and Casey is the one who shot the rogue agent. Even though Sarah had decided to run away with Chuck anyway, this just fanned the flames of her love for Chuck. She was happy and left her gun behind and was ready to give up her life as a spy. And unfortunately, she would end up not meeting Chuck at the train station because Shaw was at her door. Shaw was introduced as a shadowy figure in Chuck vs. the Three Words, and General Beckman begs Shaw not to join Team Chuck because they're not ready for him. In Operation Awesome, Chuck meets Shaw and he becomes the leader of Chuck's team. At first, I thought he was just going to be another new character, but he ended up becoming the rival of Sarah's affection. So most fans did not like Shaw at all. Shaw is the opposite of Chuck to every degree and is a super spy, but something didn't seem right about this guy. Shaw's mission in life was to find out who in the ring killed his wife. After each episode for me, Shaw became more and more unlikable, almost like he was being reared as the villain of this series, especially how he always used Chuck and Sarah. After Chuck vs. the American Hero, Shaw learns that Sarah was the one who killed his wife, and snaps and becomes a ring agent. Which honestly, I saw this coming because I'm a super fan. Alrighty, now that you have some background over the Chuck show, unfortunately, you have to go see the Chuck versus the other guy review because YouTube does not allow videos past 10 minutes. So in order to hear the full review, you'll have to watch the other video. Anyway, guys, I hope this video has been very helpful to you guys and you've gotten into the world of Chuck and that you will check out Chuck on NBC Monday nights at 8, 7 Central. Thanks so much for watching, God bless, and happy viewing. Until we meet again.